Welcome to the Potter Blog site. It is August the 23rd, 2012. This evening we present the results of our $1,900 worth of professional gamma spectrometry and strontium and plutonium testing of Missouri grass-fed, grass-finished ground beef. Thank you to the people who donated to help make this possible. We received around $1,000 in donations pre-tax. Those of you who donated, please email us if you want a copy of the raw data. We'll be happy to send you the raw lab reports minus personal identifying information and lab identifying information for your own personal use. We'll start off and give you the quick summary of the results, and then as we go through the video I'll give a little detail, and at the end of the video I'll explain the things we believe to look for that will help mitigate risk for radioactive contamination in your food supplies. Alright, so off to the quick summary. This is everything from the tests that was in the post-Fukushima ground beef that was not in the pre-Fukushima ground beef. And so basically everything you see here is radioactivity that was not found in the beef that was raised before Fukushima, but was found in the beef that was raised after Fukushima. And we'll go into this in some more detail here in a minute. There is a little bit of good news in here for the short term, and that is we did have a detection of Cesium-137 in the ground beef that went to slaughter on July 20, 2011. The test was performed in May of 2011, and the beef that went to slaughter on 5/16 of 2012, there was no evidence of Cesium-137 that we could detect, but there may have been some indications of Cobalt 60 and some other stuff, and we'll explain why we think that drop-off is happening here in a little bit. But let's go back to this chart and we'll start to get into details. Now, the key things here are this is 100% grass-fed and grass-finished beef. For those of you interested, the soil type is, I believe it's called Ferrucci silt loam, the 3 to 8% slopes. That means this farm, which is a small farm here in Missouri, is mostly on sloped land, 3 to 8%. This beef is well water fed, although there is occasional access to a river, but vast majority of the animal water supply is well water. Now, what we have here in this chart is counts per second, and across the bottom is the nucleide as identified by the software. And there is room for error in here. The software makes its best estimate of what the nucleides are, and it reports it, but they're not always 100% correct. One that is most likely the most correct is the Cesium-137. But let's explain how this works here a little bit by looking at some of the raw data. This is the raw data from the pre-Fukushima beef, and key thing to notice here is this frequency range in which this data was taken over. This is like your FM radio dial. And this received radiation from 25 kiloelectron volts to approximately 2039 kiloelectron volts. If you think of that again, that's like an FM dial dialing in your favorite radio station. And the key one to pay attention here is this 25.3 kiloelectron volts for the time being. Now we'll go to our July 2011 sample. And even though it was sampled in July 2011, it was actually tested at the lab on May 8th of 2012. Now the key here is on this one, and this is the one that had the Cesium-137 detection, the frequency range has jumped from 25 to 40. So this one they tested from 40 kiloelectron volts to 2046 kiloelectron volts. Now what's key about this is there are some X-rays that belong to Cesium-134 that are detectable below 40 kiloelectron volts. So because of this frequency range, this particular set of tests was blind to potentially some detections of cesium-134. Why this test was run at this range, I can't tell you. The next test is from May of 2012, and if you notice, the frequency range is back down to 25 to 2038. So it's interesting that a section of the reception, if you will, of the radiation was cut off from the test that had the greatest potential to detect cesium-137, and it did detect cesium-137. Alright, so let's go to this chart here. Now what's unique about this chart is that basically we grouped all these frequencies, like for example here, silver 110M. That might have 3 or 4 frequencies associated with it. And what we did in this chart is we just basically took all the ones associated with silver 110, and we just added them together to make conglomerated counts per second. So this gives us a quick overview of the data. It's, we call it maybe a 20,000 foot view. It's easy to misinterpret this data if you're not careful on what you're doing, but the higher the counts per second are, the more likely that you're able to make accurate determinations or comparisons between the different dates of beef detection. Now this big peak here is potassium 40. And what you'll see here is the pre-Fukushima beef has the highest potassium 40 level. And then if you notice the post-Fukushima beef, the potassium 40 here drops off. Now what's interesting about that is that cesium replaces potassium in your body. So both the post-Fukushima tests show a lower potassium 40 in the animal. The pre-Fukushima test shows higher potassium 40. That's some indication, especially since these match so closely, that something has replaced this potassium 40, and it may be the cesium-137 that's been detected. Now, there are some room in here for error. For example, here's a detection of sodium-22. The software thought that this was sodium-22. After we look through the data, what we really think is, it's over here, it's actually Ti-208. And you notice how there's a big gap here between the two different sets of data. So if you actually put these up, they'd be about the same. So there's some room for error in here, and that's why we made the chart we saw earlier, which has a lot less room for error. But the key things to notice in here in this chart is the potassium 40 we showed you. But if you look here, the red line is the July 2011 beef that had the high cesium-137 levels confirmed in it. If you notice, there's also high levels of bismuth-214, lead-14, and lead-212. And there was also a barium-140 detection in this 7/2011 beef. But the key thing, one thing we've done in our rain analysis of taking swipes from the rain is we've got the theory that high short half-life radiation correlates to higher levels of long half-life radiation from Fukushima in the rain. We believe that's the case because we believe that the corium in the groundwater in Fukushima is steaming out naturally occurring radon out of the groundwater in Fukushima, and along with that radon comes the radioactivity that's in the corium itself. So one thing this test does is it helps confirm that when we have high levels of cesium-137 and barium, we also see higher levels of natural radon daughters in here. Now, again, there's some uncertainties in that, but we haven't seen anything yet that discounts our risk mitigation theorem. So because of this, what we did to make these tests a little bit more apples and apples is we removed any gamma lines that were common to the pre-Fukushima beef from the post-Fukushima beef. And if you look down here at the bottom, what you'll see here is basically, you'll see two things. You'll see first the kilo electron volt frequency, which was detected, and then the software's guess of what that frequency relates to. Basically, this is the same as you're driving, say you're put down in some unknown town and you turn on the radio station and you turn it to channel 72.8 and you find music and you hear music. Maybe you hear some static too, but you hear music. So you know that there's something going on there. Eventually, if you listen long enough, you might hear the call letters from the station. And if you do that, then you can identify it. But there's a difference there between identifying it and knowing whether or not it's there. You know, some people claim if you can't identify what it is, it's not there. That's like saying if you find your neighbor murdered, that if they don't know who killed the neighbor, that your neighbor's not really dead. So what this chart tells us is what radioactivity was there, and then it tries to identify what those elements are. The key one that jumps out here is, and let me add one more thing in here. What we did is any of these channels that were found in the pre-Fukushima beef, and we went plus or minus 1 kilo electron volt. If there was a similar channel that was found in the pre-Fukushima beef, we just knocked it out of the post-Fukushima beef. So basically we used the pre-Fukushima beef as a filter to remove any noise. So everything you see here is stuff we believe is in here more than likely because of the activities of Fukushima. Now the key one that pops out is the Cesium-137, and that was detected at the 95% confidence 95% confidence level in the July 20, 2011 beef. There was also detection in that same beef of Barium-140. Now, if you notice, there's no blue line here directly next to it because the beef from 2012 didn't show any Cesium-137 at this frequency. The only one that was that showed the same levels is right here, this CE-143. This showed up in both the July 2011 beef and the May 2012 beef. If they're not directly side by side like this, then they weren't common. So you can see the post-Fukushima beef, there is a difference between the two. The red being the one that had the highest levels of Cesium-137 in it. So what we have here, and what I believe what we're seeing here, is the difference in the fallout that got into this grass-fed beef from the cattle that fed right after Fukushima versus the cattle a year later. Now, one thing to note, again, this is grass-fed beef. Cold War studies seem to indicate that grain-fed beef will have at least 2 times as much radioactivity in it for the same levels of contaminants. But if we look at this, the question is well, what's the difference between this the beef that was tested in July of 2011 versus the beef that was tested in May of 2012? 2 big differences. The first we'll say is 2011 was a massive rainstorm year for this area. So we had lots of flooding, lots of tornadoes, lots of capability to pull fallout down from the jet stream. 2012 has been a drought year. Very little rain, severe drought. So the ability for fallout to come out of the jet stream in 2012 is reduced from what it was in 2011. Now, there's another big difference. And that is that in the 2011 beef, there was the initial explosion at Fukushima. And that released a lot all at once. Now, after the explosion, there are still ongoing releases, but they're steady releases at lower levels as compared to the explosion. So the one way to think of it is eventually, it's like having a flood from getting 1 inch of rain every day. Eventually you'll have enough to flood the whole town. So there's a continuous buildup, slow buildup of Fukushima radiation coming. And whether or not it hits your area is based on location, and weather patterns and the farm soil and how your farm is set up. The soil type of this farm and the fact that it gets well water and that it's on a grade means it's less likely to accumulate cesium. We believe that the danger areas are the bottomlands, the watersheds. You know, if you've got cattle feeding at and drinking in bottomland at a pond, a lot higher potential of radioactive fallout accumulating there. And we also think we see that same effect happening in California. There have been detections of higher levels of cesium in all sorts of California nuts and fruits, some of them surprisingly high. I think pistachios was at 10 becquerels per kilogram. Now those tests were done in Japan, so there is some potential of contamination from Japan of those food sources, of those American food sources. But one thing that all those California food sources have in common is the irrigation water. And basically they're being fed by the watershed and the snow melt coming out of the mountains in California. And so that's where we think most of the radioactivity is channeling into the California crops, is basically from surface waters coming out of Fukushima. Now, if you think about the three methods of three ways that this can get into the system, and one is from rain out of the jet stream, one is lower atmosphere radioactivity, stuff that's hugging the ground. That's likely to be blocked by mountain ranges. Just like on the backside of the California Sierras is desert, that's because anything that was low-level water vapor was stopped by the mountains. So every range of mountains between you and Fukushima is a block for lower-level radiation. Now, one key thing that does stand out here, even though we've had less rain, it's this detection of Cobalt-60 that's concerning to us. Cobalt-60, animals use cobalt to make vitamin B12. And that's one of the reasons why you'll find it in the ground beef, is because we believe it gets there through vitamin B12 going in the blood. But there is one thing about this Cobalt-60 detection that gives it a little bit more uncertainty. And that is, it was only found on one channel here, 1332. Now, Cobalt-60 usually has two channels it broadcasts on. Now, it's not impossible for Cobalt-60 to broadcast only on one channel, but it's unlikely. Now, one thing the software does is the software goes through and it analyzes the frequencies and it listens to them and it says, is this background noise? Is this not background noise? So it's possible that the software itself picked up the other Cobalt-60 frequency and said, that's just background noise, let's not even count it, and therefore it's not there. But from our risk mitigation perspective, this is of some concern that the Cobalt-60 might be showing up in the beef. But that's basically the sum of what we see that's going on here. The good news is there is less radioactivity in our beef post-Fukushima by a year, but every one of these blue lines is radioactivity in the current beef that was not in the beef pre-Fukushima. And we expect this to build slowly over time as more and more radiation is released over a long period of time out of Fukushima. Now, one thing that sets this farm aside is this soil type, the clay silt loam and the 3 to 8% slopes, and the fact it's well water sourced. Clay silt tends to bind cesium-137 and not make it bioavailable. The slopes tend to run water off into areas where cows aren't going to pick it up. That's why if you see rain tests or whatever radiation tests in Japan, they're always highest in the low points where the water builds up. That's why in a previous video we said it's wise to avoid bottomland watersheds. So there is some temporary good news, but long term the situation in Fukushima is still very concerning. And again, we thank all those people who helped donate to make this possible. $2,000 for these tests is a lot of money out of our pocket. And your trust in us to help donate $1,000 total to help offset that is it's one sense it's heartwarming, reassuring to us, and we appreciate it. So what we're going to do is we've got another set of tests, this time not on beef. We try to test things we think no one else has, that has some value in determining what the situation is across the country. So we've got another interesting sample that we'll probably send in here shortly to have gamma spectrometry run on. We have a lot more detail on these tests in some of our earlier videos. If you go to the Potterblog site and click on the food testing label, you can see those tests too. And again, if you're one of the people who previously donated, you're one of those people who added to this $1,000 to make this possible, if you send us an email, you'll find our email address in your PayPal link. We'll try to get you out a copy of the raw data from the lab. We still take us a few days to remove our personal information and the lab information, and you can use that for your own purposes, your own personal purposes, and hopefully we'll share some more knowledge. Thank you and good night.